Hello, welcome to Story Islands. In a world that is obsessed by algorithms and data, Story Islands is a space for serendipity and connection. Steve Jobs famously said, "You can only trace the dots backwards." And in that spirit, in this podcast, we talk to people whose lives have navigated the not always linear route through media, technology, audience, innovation, and creativity. We asked them to share 5 story islands, people, places, themes from their life and work. And when we travel through them, we try and find connections, perhaps by not taking the linear route, uncover something unexpected along the way. If you're listening to this as a linear podcast on a regular podcast platform, you'll experience it as it unfolds in real time. But if you're watching the interactive Stornaway, you can choose which order you move through the story islands. Today, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Baroness Martha Lane Fox, entrepreneur, digital pioneer, and a passionate advocate for a fair and just internet. Martha was co-founder of lastminute.com, a startup born during the dot-com boom of 1998, when she helped show us what the web could really do, a radical new way to plan, travel, book tickets, and basically shape your everyday life. One of the moments she told me that her and her team understood they had done something quite radical was when an actor on EastEnders turned the company into a noun, saying to her friend, "It's all a bit lastminute.com, isn't it?" I think it was EastEnders. I'll ask her. She took the company to IPO in 2005, and since then, technology and innovation have run through every single part of her life. She led on the .gov UK digital transformation. She co-created Lucky Voice, a karaoke bar with a digital backbone. I'm quite interested to find out more about that. And in 2015, she founded Everyone, a think tank for responsible technology, Everyone. And if that's not enough, she's gone on to sit on the boards of some of the world's most creative tech-driven organizations. We Transfer, Chanel. She's just stepped down from being Chancellor of the Open University, and she's President of the British Chambers of Commerce. Martha has talked movingly about how a serious accident in her 30s reshaped her outlook, deepening her belief that society and technology must work for everyone. She's passionate about this and speaks regularly in the House of Lords now that she is a baroness, ever more needed in this fast-moving world driven by AI innovation. In 2025, after traveling to the US, where a CEO of a large tech company told her, "We're done with women," she warned of a degradation in tech sector culture, saying she hadn't seen any change in the numbers of women over 30 years. The industry is in peril. Well, today with our Story Islands, I'm hoping we're going to explore some of the positive things of what it means to build a digital society that's inclusive, innovative, and human-centered, and also find out more about that peril. Welcome to Story Islands, Martha Lane Fox. As if by magic, here she is.
Ta-da! Hologrammed up, 3D printed into the screen.
Well, it's only a matter of time, right?
I'm sorry, there's 2 of us as well. I've got a very noisy companion. It's better to put her on camera than try and keep her off it.
I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to meow.
She's actually been on the Channel 4 News. I was doing an interview once about Cambridge Analytica and the data scandal, and the door was shut and she was making so much noise, the camera team opened the door and she ran straight and sat on my shoulder. So Kathy Newman was interviewing me and all you could hear is meow, 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 meow.
I have a theory about cats, but maybe we won't go into that.
It'd be a whole other story.
I think it could be another podcast. So I was congratulating you on your choice of Story Islands because they're so good. I could probably spend a single episode on any of them. But I'm just going to, for the interactive episode, just outline what they are, and they will pop up at the bottom of the screen. So your 5 Story Islands, and you chose them without really knowing where we were going to go with them, but they are: my mum setting up a hotline for mums, reading William Godwin, learning about the internet at 21, learning to walk again, reading War and Peace, and then we'll get to your song at the end. But what a range.
You sound like a right plonker. I can be fun. That sounds so heavy when you read it back.
I don't think it. I mean, we've got to talk about the karaoke bar, obviously.
Yes,
but
of course.
But I think I wanted to dive kind of straight into seemingly the most kind of dry one, which is reading William Godwin, because I think it feels to me that you've chosen that for a reason. I mean, most of us won't know who William Godwin was, except that I have a vague memory of doing an English degree and reading Caleb Williams, and actually those themes of abuse of power, it's a society. He sort of reimagines what society could look like. So can we start there and tell me how
Yes, of course we can. And I was a kind of teenage girl, sort of 16, 17, I guess, maybe 18, became completely enthralled by William Godwin and his wife, Mary Wollstonecraft. And I read a bunch of stuff that he wrote and a bunch of stuff that she wrote. And the thing that really landed very deeply with me was his ideas about nature versus nurture. I mean, I think they're probably quite unfashionable now, as people, I think, believe that nature is a lot more dominant than he wanted to believe. But when he was writing in the late 19th century, he was very clear that people are kind of like a blank sheet of paper, and their environment, where they ended up, how they were born, their parents, all these things that were quite modern in thought for the late 19th century were the things that imprinted on you and created your behaviors. And it was particularly important for him because he was very, very heavily into criminal justice and prison reform. And it was something that I was also, I don't know quite why, but really interested in myself, and always thought it's unbearable that we put people in prison. That was kind of my starting point. And it really, really made such a deep mark on me and made me think about the world in a different kind of way, that if you think of people like blank pieces of paper, how should we then react to people when they go off course, or how should we construct society? And just, those moments when you're teenage and your brain is plastic and those things really kind of formulate. So that's something I go back to a lot. And the fact that he was married to Mary Wollstonecraft was like a double whammy. Obviously, she was first campaigner for female education and women's suffrage and a whole load of things. She was quite extraordinary. I mean, I think they were probably quite hard work at a dinner party, but I would still like to have met them. And they also gave birth to Mary Shelley. It was a very, very extraordinary family. So I was always super interested in him and her and them and what he said. And it is something I go back to a lot. And then in an extremely strange twist of fate, I had identical twin sons myself at the age of 43. So seeing this nature nurture thing borne out in real time, I think he would be somewhat confused by seeing identical twins close up. Not sure it would play into his theory, but it was a very important part of sort of how I began to construct values in my life.
And it's interesting because that was such an early influence, and yet now, as a woman with identical sons, having worked really at the center of kind of state .gov.uk, you were really at the beginnings of how we can kind of help everyone access what they need. I mean, it has. Do you think your idealism of that young girl reading William Godwin and now, is there would you look back and laugh, or
no,
do you feel
no, I hope I wouldn't. I mean, I probably sound naive and ridiculous, but I absolutely wouldn't. My core belief is the same, in that, of course, people are born with characteristics and behaviors, and my God, if you saw my identical twin sons, they are so different, and yet their environment is pretty much 99% the same. But my context has been everything in my life. The way I was born into a secure and loving family, given an amazing education, never ever for a minute been made to feel as though being a woman was going to be a difference in my life, having been challenged, been pushed, all the things that I have valued. And I just refuse to believe that most people, given that opportunity, wouldn't rise to it in some way. So that is just a very central belief of mine, and was what made me want to originally go into prison governing when I left university. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to the Home Office and try and go and work in this sector. Didn't end up that, obviously, but it's something I stay close to. And actually, when I was at school, partly because of reading Godwin, I lobbied hard at school to not do sport because I didn't like sport, but to spend the time that people were doing sport by writing to people in prison, which eventually they allowed me to do. So I used to write to youth offenders, and then I wrote to people in prison, and it was a big part of what I thought I wanted to do in the world at that age. So yeah, I think there are very much straight lines, maybe with a few zigzags, between what I thought then and what I think now.
And that's a really good hop-off point I'm going to go back an island to your mum setting up a hotline for mums, because obviously the female empowerment, the sense that you just said you never had a feeling that you couldn't achieve anything, was that directly a line through to her?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things, actually.
Also, what did her hotline do?
No, well, wait, exactly. I mean, this is why it's slightly more serious than you might imagine. So
Okay.
my dad is a writer and not celebrity, but he's kind of well known. And often I'll meet people and they're like, "Are you Robin Lane Fox's daughter?" I mean, it's sometimes really infuriating people, that famous people I'm excited to meet, and the first question they ask me is, "Are you related to Robin Lane Fox?" I'm sure you're familiar with this feeling. So I've had that in my life. But my mum is an equally remarkable person, and they got married when she was just 22. She never was given proper education, but she's very bright. But she came from a generation and a background where my grandmother was like, "Don't be ridiculous, you don't have to go to university," even though she would have thrived in that environment. But she always was doing entrepreneurial type things, but it just wasn't on the public stage as my dad. And she was not particularly happy when, particularly after my brother was born, and she set up a hotline for particularly mums, but I guess parents. It was called Parents Anonymous, who thought they were going to abuse their kids, to try and catch them at the point before they did something to them. So either something violent, so they could call this hotline in the moment and talk through what they were going to do. I really want to throw my baby on the bed, or I really want to hit my child, whatever, because she saw this link between depression postpartum and all that stuff and children's environments. So it's called Parents Anonymous. The reason I particularly remember it is because she set it up just in the village hall where we lived, and it was a horrible, cold, wet, dark village hall, and we would go and sit while she and her friends volunteered and manned these phone lines. And I remember just sitting in the back of the hall in the kind of damp, thinking, why are we doing this at 8 o'clock in the night on a Tuesday evening, aged 8? But now I look back on it, that was a really extraordinary thing that she was trying to do. And I'm sure through osmosis, some of that went into me about trying to contribute to the world and think about problems. And also, and this does link back to Godwin, and it actually links to right now. This, to just jump around a bit, I've been asked to comment a lot on the budget this week, the most ridiculously noisy budget in history. And for example, this noise around taking the benefits cap off two-child families, I really believe that's the right thing to do, because I really believe no one wakes up in the morning to give their family a bad life, right? And so there's such a strong link to me for my mum in that village hall doing that for the women or men that were going to abuse their kids, through to Godwin, through to now. And so I do know that those moments have had a really deep impact on me.
Amazing. And did she was it like did she have one phone? I'm struggling with the timeline and the technology.
No, she definitely did only have one phone at the beginning. I can't remember how it developed. I must talk about it with her sometime. But I remember I'm probably remembering it a bit wrong. I remember it a bit like a kind of like a phone hotline in the middle of a room, like they were calling, when they call into Downing Street, emergency. Obviously, it wasn't like that, but it was intense. That's how I remember it. It was
an amazing example of your mum showing you,
yes,
that you can make something happen if you believe in it, and
something difficult, and something, there was not resources. It was tough.
Yeah. I want to dive more into your feelings, because you've recently talked quite a lot about I'm not going to dive into the budget, although I'm quite interested about that too. But I want to the feeling, because obviously you were a woman in technology before anybody was maybe even having those conversations. I mean, I think there's been this history of women in technology, and we could possibly go into that. But so maybe this is a moment to go into you learning about the internet at 21 and kind of almost finding yourself in that space of being in the kind of most game-changing place in the world as a 21-year-old woman, and how that felt.
Well, it was the sliding doors moments of life. So I really did think I might go and work in the criminal justice system, and then I didn't do so well at university, so they wouldn't put me in the fast track for the Home Office. And I thought, I don't want to just climb my way up through the civil service. I'm not sure I'm going to be very good at doing that kind of work. And so then, just quite by chance, ended up in a company that was doing projects for businesses looking at the internet. And I remember a good friend of mine showing me, because he'd been in Japan, this device, which was one of the first connected devices, and talking about the internet. And then, funnily enough, to come back full circle, my mum was always quite tech forward, and I remember her also talking or thinking of saying something about the internet. So it was kind of out there in the ether. And then I found myself working in this business that was looking at it, and this was like 1994, when it was still very early and people were very, very skeptical. And I was a young person in a consulting firm going into environments, often telecoms environments, where we were being asked to explain what the internet was to telecoms executives. And I remember I was sent around the world to do this project for British Telecom called What is the Internet? And I was just doing the drudge kind of research work. And I went to Korea, and I went to Japan, and I went to America to just get information about what all these places were doing about telecoms networks. And because I was the lowest of the low, I was just collecting data. But when I went to Japan, my boss couldn't come. Something happened, and I had to go to a kind of slightly more senior meeting than I would normally have been allowed into. And it was just me in the room and all these executives from Mitsubishi. And it was the first time I remember thinking, oh, I'm different to this, because in walked 10 men in suits, and it was Japan and it's different culture and all that stuff. And they went to describe, this is absolutely true story, the network that they built around Tokyo, which was a super, super fast fiber broadband ring. And the first page, they said, we will describe to you the super fast network that we built around Tokyo. This network is called the PENIS network. And I was like, what? And I thought I misheard it. And then the first page came up, and it was like, the PENIS network will be. And I mean, I'm still to this day, I feel like they must have known, and they were taking the piss out of me. They must have known. But this went on for an hour and a half, like every page. The PENIS network will. Anyway,
and you didn't say anything. You didn't.
No, I couldn't do anything. I was like 21. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I was totally confused. But now I look back on it, it's like, yeah, the PENIS network is alive and well in the technology sector. It was like a concrete kind of, shape of things to come.
Message from the future.
Yes,
exactly.
But that was really those moments of the first time the internet was sort of going into my system as something that was super important. And because I've been working in it for 2 or 3 years, then when Brent asked me if I'd like to go and co-found lastminute.com with him, it was so many already part of my kind of thinking about how the world was changing. So I feel so lucky that I was given that exposure at that time, because it really changed everything.
Yeah, having access, and again, that goes back to what opportunities we give people. Literally just seeing that world unfolding has enabled you to move through your path. And it's an interesting point, because I think in this podcast we talk a lot about chances and opportunities, and of course for everybody the way that their life has shaped is to do with doors opening at weird moments or bumping into someone on the street. But the context in which we bump into someone on the street and a door opens is obviously very heavily loaded by where we've come from and our context and what we've been given growing up. So that's really interesting. But coming back to you, Brent, asking you to join him as a collaborator, how did you then move into this phase of your life where you were collaborating on something that you didn't quite know what it was going to be yet?
Oh no, we did know what it was going to be.
Oh, you did. You had a clear vision.
Brent had all credit to him. It was his idea. He was the most last minute person at that point in his life, and this was just something he could see would be super useful, and the technology enabled it. We used to have CFAX to look at holidays. You look at that printed text on a screen and then call a number and the holiday was sold. But the internet was enabling these marketplaces and exchanges to be built. So he saw it completely, and I guess the only thing I can add to it was that just, I guess, through our personalities, we gave it the personality and the life to become lastminute.com. The pink. So it was pretty clear, the product, because we could see it and we would use it. The challenge was getting the money and building it, because at that point the technology was still rubbish, and as you might remember, we were all waiting for websites to load. That was the challenge. That was the nightmare of it, and we spent ages worrying about the speed of the homepage. That was like dementing.
And there's a lot of talk about female founders now, lack of access for female founders to funding. Were you aware of yourself as a female founder at that point? Did you have to sit in the background? Were you taken seriously when you went into investor meetings? It'd be interesting to know.
I mean, I think now I look back on it, I really wish I had written more down, because it was such an enormous moment personally, but it was a bit of a cultural moment in the UK. And it felt like people were excited. Tony Blair had come into power. Suddenly entrepreneurship was becoming a thing. Brent and I were literally on the front of the papers all the time. And I don't say that in an arrogant way. I say that I was just still somewhat surprised that it was the case. But I walked down the street and people would be like, "Hi, Martha. Hi, Martha." It was very, very strange. It was really weird. And it was a bit like being in a very famous pop band that had one hit and then it kind of stopped. But at that moment in time, it was super, super weird. And so I didn't feel so aware of being a woman. But then sometimes this like jolt, like, oh my God, this is happening. And some of the things that really struck us both, but particularly obviously for me, was, they take our photo and they cut Brent out of the picture. Go for it. I was helpful for a narrative that the media wanted to build, but this was a brave new world, and look, young women were doing this thing, and all that stuff. But it wasn't true. That wasn't true. It was Brent's idea and his company, and he was so generous in how he dealt with that, because I think some people, I'm sure it really did wind him up, but he could see that, hopefully he could see it wasn't me angling for that. But there's, the flip side of that is that I know that by being unusual, we got some attention, which was helpful because we had no marketing budget. So, I'm not naive about it. It was we played the game, and the game came back and bit me sometimes quite sharply, particularly when the share price fell. But the truth is that I don't think I thought very much about being a woman, because back to, I'd not been treated any differently in my home life. I wasn't used to that as a concept. There were some things that happened that were like, oh my God, okay, that's the way the world works. So when we were first raising money, venture capitalists, definitely some of the more old-fashioned ones were outrageous, asked me what happens if I get pregnant, well, just didn't look at me in the meetings, those kinds of things. But they just felt like there was something wrong with them. It was only really over the course of the whole time, and then subsequently, that I realized, oh, we're the outliers here. This isn't actually a massive sectoral and world change. I thought so much that this would be the beginning of something super exciting for the world. There's going to be like distributed power, and different people are going to start businesses, and we're going to see a whole huge number of different people able to do things in new ways. That was not the case. But I think when you're in it and it's so frenetic, just building the thing you're trying to do, it didn't reflect too much on whether or not it was strange that we were a man and a woman doing this. I think only now do I realize, when I look at the numbers, it's not just now, but over the last couple of decades, that it's just so disappointing and horrifying. And as you said, just to be super clear about the numbers, 2% of businesses are started by women. Only 7% of venture capital partners are women. There's just a loop there that, I don't think people give money to things that they don't feel confident in, because they don't have experience of products. So I just think it's different, and it's really, really depressing to me that there are more women in the House of Lords as a percentage than there are in the technology sector. And yet this is a sector that's eating the world, is the most powerful, is dominating everything, has got jobs, is, all the stuff. So it's one of the major surprises of my professional life. And I'm only laughing because I find it so absurd.
Well, because you've been essentially giving this message for a long time now about how it can be a force for good, how it can create inclusion, and you're finding now that it's doing the opposite.
And so it's really going super well. I mean, I'm really doing a great job at this.
I think that's a good moment. I think that's a good moment to move to your next island. I am doing it this linearly, interestingly, but it's because you're so good at the non-linear stuff. So learning to walk again, it feels to me, this is referring to the terrible accident you had that meant that you had to literally, as far as I can understand it, learn to do everything again. There's something about you facing forward and moving through things. So even though you're saying the world's gone mad, it's a nightmare, there's something very resilient about you. Is it from that moment? I mean, it sounds like it's from earlier, but it'd be interesting to hear your experience.
No, I think back to Godwin, the nature nurture piece. I think I'm just very lucky that or maybe not lucky. I mean, we don't become too like we're in a therapy session, but I think that I have always tried to just keep going, I guess. And I don't mean I faced loads of hardships in my life. I haven't, but there were moments at lastminute.com was pretty tough, and you just have to keep going. But whether or not I ended up being in that environment because I'm like me, or whether it taught me something, or both. It's hard to unpick those things sometimes, isn't it? So I think through my childhood was very secure and happy, but my parents did get divorced, and that's the thing when you're a young person. I was very happy at university, but I had extremely bad endometriosis, and I was hospitalized a lot, and I kind of kept going through that. So there's things that you face in life, and I think the way you're brought up gives you the tools to face them. Coupled with each time things happen, you just build a bit more of that muscle strength, don't you? But I often say this, there is no magic to resilience, in my opinion. It's something you just have to do. It's not like you don't learn it. You just have to do it. And it's hard work. It's not something that comes easily. And I think the reason I put learning to walk again, and the reason it's not just that moment in time for me, but it's something that is a constant, is because, when I went from being an able-bodied person to a disabled person, life changed completely. And I go back in my head a lot to thinking, just think about what that feeling was like when after 9 months I had to stand up. And I think about that a lot because things happen pretty regularly in my life now that are tough. But that moment where I had to stand up again was really freaking awful and hard, and really had to push through something very, very difficult because it was physically impossible. It was mentally horrible, just lots of reasons. And so
when you say you had to stand up again, that was from being in bed, or which moment was it?
It was often about 9 months in hospital, and I'd been in a metal fixator, so it's like a metal cage that they put over your pelvis because my pelvis had been so broken. So I hadn't stood up. I'd been flat, or I'd been in a wheelchair, sort of. So anyway, in lots of complicated positions. Anyway, after about 9 months, I had to stand up, and they put you in something that looks a bit like a kind of electrocution chair, which you're kind of strapped into, and you have to kind of lift yourself up. And my legs were like little spindly sticks. It was unbearable. But also because of all the nerve damage, the feelings that you get, not even quite pain, it's sort of beyond pain, like itching and burning and all that stuff, were pretty horrible. Quite apart from just the mental thing of can I actually get upright? So. It's a moment probably where a lot of the trauma for me of the accident goes to in my head, is that moment of standing up, even though the 2 years of hospitalization had many moments of equal horror in them. But I think it's more about the metaphor for me of how in my own head and my own life now, when I try and think about, okay, you can do this, I think back to that moment of standing up, and I'm like, you can do it because you did that.
Yes.
So, a couple of years ago, I had difficult operation and hip replacement, and I got sepsis and a bone infection, and I had to go back into hospital for a really long time and had to live in cycles of very, very intense antibiotics. But I found myself in my mind going back to that micro of you can only focus on the next few minutes ahead of you, or the next few hours. And that's what it's, in my opinion, that's what resilience is just breaking things down so that you just face into the next tiny bit, give yourself the goal to just keep going over the next short time frame. So yeah.
And I think that understanding for the generation coming up, who faced all sorts of outward stimulus that has clearly contributed to their feeling unsure in the world and insecure in the world. It's interesting. I had an experience actually with my daughter where she had something bad happen, and she voiced it exactly like you said. Once she got out of it, she said, "Mum, I always look back to that moment, and I know that, if it's not as bad as it was then it's, I can get." And I think we don't necessarily talk about that enough, about bad things happening, and they do to a lot of people all the time, and how they literally build muscle. They build muscle.
No, it's when I go and talk in schools fairly regularly, and I think that normally the school thinks I'm going to come and do a thing about entrepreneurship and how exciting it is to build a business, blah, blah, blah. And I never do that. I always go, life can be really freaking hard. It really can, but you just have to do it. And some things that I found helpful are friends and reading, and some tricks that I give them some examples. But that's my thing, is get on with it. It's not that's what it is. And sometimes it's miraculous and joyful, and human beings are incredible, but sometimes it's really tough. So you got little children. I was in one school, I was like, this looks completely shell-shocked kids in the front row. And I thought, oh God, what have I done? But then at the end, one little kid put his hand up and he's desperate to say something. I was like, what do you want to say? And he goes, I get it. If something feels really hard, you just have to do it and it'd probably be okay. And I was like, yeah, that's the thing, right? And so I agree with you. It doesn't have to be a negative message. I think it's a realistic message, and I hope it's kind of a hopeful message too, because I think human beings are extraordinary.
And that brings us to your final island about war and peace. Big subject, Martha, big subject.
Well, it was reading War and Peace.
Reading
right?
war. Well, you said that reading has brought you solace, and the subject matter. Talk a bit, because I think of all books, I would imagine, again, I don't know enough about it, but that it speaks to this time we're in. And yeah, share what's your...
I first read War and Peace when I was 17, 18, I think, and I probably understood about 1% of it, but I took something from it, because the amazing thing about that book is that reading it different times in your life, you see very different stories in it, and you find different things, and you understand different perspectives of it. And I read it again a couple of years ago, and I saw it was a completely different book to me again. I think that was probably my 4th time in reading it, and that's why I think it's just so spectacular. Because on one level, it's like reading kind of Good Housekeeping from the 1950s. It's just an incredible family drama. And if you read again, there's a kind of existential thing about faith, religion, philosophy, life, how we show up in the world. Then there's obviously a massive thing about war and empire, and then the very personal thing about adversity. So, it's just such a spectacular canvas of humanity that I have gone back to it multiple times in my life, because I find it so incredible that one book can operate in all these different levels at different times in your own life. And I also find it completely baffling. And every time I read it, I hope it's not true, but I'm just so angry all the time, because Tolstoy really wasn't a very nice man. I mean, by all accounts, I've read a couple of biographies. He really wasn't. He was horrible to the people around him. His family was spoiled. He was rich. And yet he can create this extraordinary picture of particularly women and young women. And I read these characters and I'm like, how can this grumpy old rich Russian man be able to draw something about women that is just so incredibly infuriating? So I every time I read it, I'm like, can it really be true? How can this be right? And it always is right, which is kind of annoying. So yes, there is something for all time in it, and I it's like, oh, I read War and Peace. I sound like a right plonker, but I just urge everybody to pick up something difficult or something big or something scary, because it's really an extraordinary thing when you read a book that is so deeply challenging on so many levels, but in my opinion, you can take so much from.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to. Right, I'm straight off.
And it's not easy, but I always say this to people. It's like, just push through the bits that you're not finding easy. There's a lot of things. Oh, this princess said that to that counter. Just get through that and get to the bits that you're finding something. So, whether it's a scene of war where somebody gets wounded and you understand the perspective of being in the mud from a soldier falling in it, or there's an incredible hunting scene, a famous hunting scene, which is just so breathtaking about the vividness of the nature in the forest and the way the animals are going through the forest. So just go to the bits that you can find something, and you don't have to worry about the other bits. The other bits, if you want to, you can go back to in another time. I think sometimes we just think of books as this kind of linear experience, but they don't always have to be. You can push through the bits that might not be the bits that you find so appealing, and just get to the other pieces.
And I think that's such a good, the idea of multi-perspectives and diving into the ones that maybe you might find difficult. It seems to me that is very relevant to our times, where people are living in silos, holding their beliefs like a sort of badge of honor. And actually we need to be in a place where we're dealing with each other's difficult opinions, paradoxes. Coming back to your sort of hope, or rather, you said in the middle of the linear version of this about well, it's all going very well. I think a few people I've been speaking to have shared your opinion that we are sort of a rock bottom in terms of how we listen to each other and how we help each other. And where do you see the glimmers of light from your kind of very long experiences from the boardroom to the government, state departments? Where can you see the light coming?
I always see it. I mean, I really do. I think that what is the point in not trying to find it? I think, I don't have very many special powers, but I know what I'm quite good at is always trying to find the joy in something or the positive in something, because generally I'm a pretty optimistic person. And, I'm not insane. I know that for some people at the minute, in many places in the world, but picking here, it's really tough and life is feeling pretty brutal. And if you are a young person that can't get a job in an area of the world that feels really difficult and you don't know what your future is going to be, that is a pretty bleak spot. So I'm not saying it's a universal, but for me personally, I don't find it so hard to find the light. I think it's everywhere. And I think it's all of our responsibility to keep reminding people of that. And one of the reasons I feel a bit disappointed in this government is because I think there's been too much of the negative and not enough of the positive. And again, I don't mean to go out blindly just saying everything's perfect, but I think it's the job of leaders to make people feel as though things are possible and that things that might be out of reach right now are going to become more in reach, and that everybody has got something to shoot for. I think that is kind of what leadership is about. And
Yes.
so I think it's really dangerous when you get to a point where people don't believe that anymore or can't see a route out to better things, even though I know that won't always be the case for everyone. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
it did.
I think it's, I think it's just a paucity of good leadership. That's what I feel. I'm not just picking on our current Prime Minister. I like him personally, but I think across the board, you think about big companies, too often you hear of bad things happening in big companies. Or if you think about, lots of the political classes, not just here, but all over the place. I just think we don't have enough people we can say that is what good leadership looks like. And of course, those people are there. They're running charities. They're doing amazing stuff in their local communities. They might be school governors. They might be running hospitals. There are people everywhere, but somehow the ones that seem to get the air that we need at a kind of national conversation level, we don't have.
That's very well put. Thank you. Because I think also that multi-perspectives, coming back to where you first saw your mum doing something in her.
Yes, there's my mum getting married. Can you see a nice picture of her behind me? That's my mum. She was getting married in her.
I mean, that kind of personal responsibility to do what you can in the framework you're in is a very positive message. Then I think, like you say, if you're that whole idea that if you can give someone a hand up, if you can bring someone in who has a different opinion, I think, that there's a different kind of leadership that I think we're craving at this moment. Let's hope. I'm gonna look for the light, Martha. That's it.
Yeah. But also, I really, I maybe again back to the cold hall with the parents hotline. I do really think everyone can make a difference in things. And, one of my favorite quotes is about how one person can change the world because a group of what I can't remember now, I'm going to forget what it was, but that was something like there's a is it
all I can think of is light bulbs.
Margaret Mead, maybe it's Margaret Mead, who said that small group of committed people that can always change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever did. And I really believe that so strongly. And again, without becoming quote-tastic, the other thing that I go to in my head a lot is an incredible Martin Luther King quote, which is, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But whatever you do, just keep moving forwards, which obviously for me has a particular intensity. But I just show up. You can always do something. You can always do something.
Thank you so much. We're going to end on that note with your song that you've chosen. And finally, I might get a chance to get a little glimpse of why the karaoke bar.
Karaoke. I started this business, Lucky Voice. I love Japan. I'm not so good at singing, but it always struck me as strange that we don't have anything similar in Europe, because Europeans like singing, English people like singing. So we started clubs where you can hire a private room and sing with your friends. It's pretty fun.
And there's nowhere that you feel people making something happen, I know this from personal experience, than getting a group of people singing together.
That's
because
true.
the people who don't think they can sing suddenly feel like they can sing. The people who can sing lead.
And everybody's always a bit apprehensive, and then all of a sudden it's just incredible. I just get this burst of energy. And when I was growing up, I absolutely loved musicals, particularly MGM musicals from the 1950s. That would be my special subject on Mastermind. Got huge pictures of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, but although Sid Charisse was actually my favourite dancer. But there's a movie called Summer Stock with Judy Garland in it, in which she sings the very, very famous track Get Happy. And not only is that just the most spectacular dance sequence, and I think she was something like 44 when she did it, and everyone's like, she's 44, which now of course doesn't seem old at all when you think about J-Lo bouncing around at 57 or whatever she is. But at that time it was quite unusual, I think, for a 43-year-old woman to be in a micro suit and dancing as she did with her incredible legs. But the track, well, maybe obvious reasons.
Get to trouble, come on, get happy. Okay.
You can sing. I cannot, so I'm not going to. You can sing.
We'll play it out. We'll play it out, and we will jig in on.
But also look at the video, because it's a fantastic, dramatic musical setting that she sings it in.
Maybe that's your next challenge, is to learn that dance routine.
Yup. I'll work on that. See you when I'm 70.
I think we can make the show happen.
Perfect.
Thank you so much,
the kids to hold me up.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And yeah, brilliant.
My pleasure.